Alrighty, got a bleed bow champion build overview. Jump right into this. So I haven't done one of these in a while. Pretty much just going to be going over the basics of this build, why it works, how it works, my thoughts on the setup. Not going into super heavy detail, but just kind of giving a nice overview of what's going on. But I like to start off with some gameplay of it. So I've got here a Dark Forest map with one of the Elder Guardians on it, which coincidentally happens to be the easiest one for this character. We'll jump into this map. Show a little bit of the map clear, which isn't anything super amazing, partly due to my choices in the setup. And then we'll also do the boss, so you can see how the single target's like, how the defenses are like. But pretty much right away, you will notice I don't clear very fast, but I also don't really take any damage while I'm mapping, and that's due to a combination of things. I have pretty good mitigation thanks to permanent fortify and a little bit of fortify buff effect. I've got quite a lot of armor from both flasks and just in general, which in turn leads to having a pretty strong molten shell. My regular molten shell is absorbing up to 6,000 damage, and I'm pretty much just spamming that whenever I see a big pack of mobs or anything that looks the least bit threatening. Then I've also got a decent little bit of evasion, because I've chosen not to go after iron reflexes for even more armor, just because I felt like it wasn't needed. But the bulk of the clearing in the map is being done with split arrow, which easily hits 100% chance to bleed with the setup we have, so everything always bleeds, even from the split arrow. I have a puncture for single target, and then the new ensnaring arrow, which is linked to Mirage Archer, being used to apply its debuff to everything, which causes any enemy that it's hit by to be counted as moving, which is a huge boost to the overall bleed DPS without needing to do something like spec into Crimson Dance, which has its own handful of downsides. So overall, for bow bleeding builds, this has been a huge boost to the DPS power. Just jumping in and out real quick to fill my flasks up. And then before I go into the boss room, I'm actually going to show the one gem swap that I've been doing with the build. This is specifically for killing bosses where I don't need the split arrow anymore. I'm actually dropping split arrow in favor of frenzy with curse on hit vulnerability, just to get a little bit of extra damage. And I would also put in culling strike, except I don't have an extra green socket on my body armor. I tried to turn one of the red sockets into a white socket, but I hit a green one instead. So no culling strike, but it is an option. And then you'll see, while I'm fighting the boss, I'm using ensnaring arrow and frenzy to keep the buffs and debuffs up. I'm dropping artillery ballistas that are acting as my decoy totems, and then I'm making sure I always have a punctured bleed on the boss, and he'll go down pretty quickly. One thing to keep in mind is it is actually beneficial, even though every hit bleeds, to whenever you can do so safely, to keep hitting the boss with your puncture, because the higher your base damage rolls, since that's on a variable range, the stronger the bleed is going to be. So you're kind of fishing for the strongest bleed possible. As you can see, this guy goes down without really much of any difficulty. And that kind of is the big benefit of the build for bossing. In addition to being both pretty tanky and pretty good DPS, I actually get to be very mobile while I'm doing the damage, since the bleed is just a damage over time. So I have plenty of time to dodge whatever I need to, focus on the boss's attacks instead of being locked into just doing all of my damage. And I think that about covers a nice little overview of it, so let's get into some of the details. First off, the gear. Start with the uniques. The only unique I'm actually wearing right now is a Rislatha's Coil, which the more maximum physical damage to attacks and the less minimum physical damage to attacks does scale your bleed damage, because these are factored in as part of your base damage, which is different from, you know, increasing like attack damage. For whatever reason, just know that those do affect your bleed, and having a less minimum bleed doesn't really matter, Because if I hit enough times and I fish for a stronger bleed, only that strongest bleed is the one doing damage. So with the best case scenario, this belt can give me right now up to 45% more bleed damage, which is pretty great. And then I've got the new catalysts on it, the attack modifiers catalyst, which is increasing the potency of those mods. And also giving a little bit of the extra flat physical damage to it. The other unique I have is a jewel, which I would almost consider mandatory. It's not technically mandatory, but like it's strong enough that if you can't get yourself a lionized fall or you don't have one, it might not be the best idea to consider doing this setup. You could argue to do it as like a gladiator build, which gets a lot more damage built in, but then you lose the tankiness of the champion. But on a champion, you really need the benefits from this lionized fall to help boost your damage. As I'm turning all of these axe nodes into bow nodes to scale our damage, and then even the sword one down here into bow nodes, and all of these keystones are very powerful. A lot of damage multipliers. You get a little bit of onslaught on kill from slaughter even, which is nice for clearing. Faster bleed, which is another effectively multiplier. But those two are my only uniques. There is one other unique that you can consider and probably should consider if you're on a lower budget, which is this right here, Lionized Vision. Has built-in pierce, really nice armor, pretty good life, a little bit of physical damage leached as mana, which is actually helpful. And it has plus 160 dex requirement, which actually makes it easier to hit the green sockets that you're going to need on the body armor. If we go back to my body armor with my mapping setup in, you can see I'm actually running Pierce in my 6-link. I need it for the split arrow to clear quickly. So even a 5-link Lionized chest is basically a 6-link of this. The only reason to switch off of Lionized, in my opinion, is if you need resistances on your chest, like I needed all the resistances on this to be able to put the Rislotha's Coil on and still be relatively capped for elemental weakness like I like to be. Or if you want to go real big investment and you want to get a Crusader influenced body armor, which I think the best way would be to get something like a 6-link Astral and get a Crusader's Exalted Orb, and then try to craft for the new mod that you can get on those, which gives you the enemies you kill explode, dealing 3% of their life as physical damage, and that's a huge boost to your clear speed. And speaking of that, if you don't want to go as heavy investment for that body armor, you can get the Hemophilia gloves. I don't have a pair to show off that do basically the same thing. If they're bleeding, they explode, they deal damage, it helps your clear. I've just personally chosen not to because I was mostly focused on bossing with this character, and my current gloves have a lot of resistances on them that I'd have to account for somewhere. And I just didn't feel like fixing it and swapping stuff around all the time. But that's that for the uniques. Rest of the gear is pretty straightforward. Jewelry, you're kind of just looking for life and resistances, and you need some stats here and there. Don't need the strength on this, but it's extra HP, so it's good. This one has a lot of dexterity, and I'm using another catalyst on this to increase the dexterity even further, which helped me avoid needing 2 items with dexterity to reach how much I need to use a Citadel bow, which is our ideal base. But otherwise, again, life and resistances and stats needed. And same on the amulet. And you'll see both of these I have minus mana cost crafted. The only reason I have those crafted is because I currently don't have any source of physical attack damage leached as mana. If I had any bit like what the Lionized chest had, even that 0.4%, I wouldn't need either of those crafts, and I could use much more useful crafts on those items. But something I'm just currently missing on the character. Boots is pretty much same deal, life, resistances, movement speed, and then same with gloves. The only ones that really get interesting is Quiver, which I'm just going to go with a basic uninfluenced Quiver first. What you're looking for is high life roll, obviously, and then the new damage over time multiplier, which you can see there. This is tier 2. It's a pretty rare mod, pretty hard to find, so the best Quiver you can find that also has that is just ideal. And then helmet, I have a pretty special one here. I crafted it with a couple of fossils. I used the dense fossil and the jagged fossil. The dense fossil lets us get increased effect of fortify, which again We have permanent fortify as a champion, so that's permanently helping us. And then nearby enemies take 9% increased physical damage from the jagged fossil. The only thing with this fossil combo is you cannot roll life because the dense fossil blocks life. So you're going to kind of have to deal with crafted life most likely. But overall, those two modifiers on the helmet are extremely powerful and definitely worth the trade-off there. And then last up, we've got our bow, which is another fossil crafted item. And you want a Citadel bow base. It is not the highest DPS bow, but it is the highest top-end damage bow, which is what we're looking for a bleeding build. And what you really, really need here, the mandatory mod is this first one listed when we show the extra details. 60% chance for bleeding, inflicted with this weapon to deal 100% more damage. So effectively 100% more damage because you're going to attack anything that matters enough times to trigger that effect. So it's doubling your bleed damage. And you get this with a corroded fossil. But the way you actually want to craft the bow is a corroded and a jagged fossil together. Since the jagged fossil will let you get higher chances of rolling some physical damage modifiers, which help you as well. But more importantly, it blocks all of the poison related modifiers, which the corroded fossil tries to give you. So then you really up your odds of hitting the kind of things you want. And aside from that 100% more damage mod, the ideal kind of things you're looking for are flat physical damage, percent physical damage. You can see I have both of those on mine. One of them is crafted. Attack speed is nice, not really necessary. Just helps really map speed a little bit, I guess. And then the damage with bleeding suffix, which there's a few tiers of that. And the bleeding suffix you're pretty likely to hit. It's pretty common, it seems, with the fossil combo. But the big thing, again, is that double bleed damage mod. Just look for that until you find one that has it, plus as much as you're satisfied spending with on the rest of the mods. I believe that is covers the basics on the gear. The only thing to mention aside from that is if you want to go very heavy investment, might I introduce you to our friend, the new Hunter Influence that you can use on almost every single item in this build to craft even better damage. If you get a Hunter Influenced Quiver, for example, you can get 21 to 25% physical damage over time multiplier, which it is possible to stack with the other damage over time multiplier on quivers. And this one's even higher, so there's a bunch of DPS to gain there. You could craft a pair of Hunter Gloves. You could get another 13 to 16% physical damage over time multiplier. Another big boost. You can get Hunter Influenced Boots even, I believe. Yes. Bleeding you inflict deals damage 8 to 10% faster. Effectively another kind of one of those multipliers. And I think the last one is you can get a Hunter Influenced Bow. You would really need a Hunter Influenced Citadel Bow, because again that's the base you need. Which gives another bleeding you inflict deals damage 22 to 25% faster. So a pretty huge amount of DPS to be gained across all those items. I don't have any of it on my character, and I still kill bosses pretty quickly. You can imagine what that would be like with all of those. But if you're looking for some heavy investment, there's definitely a lot of potential to pull out of this setup. But that is that for the gear. Real quickly, just go over the flasks. I've got a Quicksilver of Adrenaline, pretty normal. Jade Flask, nice evasion, works well with the character. I like it a lot. Freeze removal, need freeze removal. Granite Flask of Iron Skin. You definitely want this Iron Skin suffix on your Granite Flask to really boost your armor up. You can see, even though I have 11,000 armor unbuffed right now, Granite Flask pulls us up to 27,000, which is huge for the Molten Shells. Surgeon Prefix, not ideal, but mine rolled really high percent increased armor, so I kept it. I've been using a Quartz Flask here as my other utility flask. This one's kind of a preference flask. I wasn't running Quartz originally. I don't remember what I was running. Maybe a Basalt Flask or something, or a Sulfur Flask. But I like Quartz just for the phasing. I don't even care that much about the chance to dodge, but the phasing is really nice, especially if you do any delving. And then I've got Curse Removal on that. And of course, instant Divine Life Flask of Staunching. Get rid of the bleeds. Take care of all that for you. And let's see. Next up, gems. Quick gems. The support gems for our Puncture, which is our single target, are right here. Chance to bleed, brutality, vicious projectiles, deadly ailments, swift affliction. Why did I pick all those gems? Because they're the ones that give us the most DPS. Split arrow, same thing. We've got deadly ailments again, brutality, chance to bleed. But now we have maim in place of one of the other multipliers. I chose this just mostly because, again, it's an astral plate. It's hard to get a ton of green sockets, but maim is pretty nice. The only other place I have maim is on our ensnaring arrow, so it's fine there. And then obviously the pierce to help clear. And then on the ensnaring arrow, I've got greater multiple projectiles, help tag more enemies with that debuff. Mirage Archer, help tag more enemies with that debuff. And again, maim to also debuff them with the maim debuff from the gem to increase damage taken. Over here we got some utility stuff. Blood Rage, just for attack speed and frenzies while mapping. The Vol Molten Shell, an increased duration. As well as the Artillery Ballista, which again, the point of this ballista is, it's basically a decoy totem. I tried decoy totem. I tried Artillery Ballista. I like Artillery Ballista more. But you have to be a champion for the Artillery Ballista to work, because I'm taking advantage of the fact that I have a 100% chance to taunt on hit, which is inherited by the totem. So all of these are pretty much decoy totems, and I can get 3 of them, and they have a much faster placement speed. But then finally we got our auras in the helmet. Flesh and Stone, pretty much always on sand stance. You can switch it to blood stance, it'll give you some more damage, but it doesn't feel necessary. Pride, more damage. War Banner, more damage. And Flame Dash for movement, because bow movement skills suck. They just kind of suck. Onwards to passive tree. Very quickly, Ascendancy. Fortify nodes. Permanent Fortify, really good. Conqueror, chance to taunt. Goes to the totems, really nice. Lots of mitigation here, especially if your totems taunt the enemies. They're dealing 10% less damage, and then they're dealing another 10% less damage. You also get the 6% reduced damage taken if you taunt them, and you get life regen. Very good. And then finally, I have the First to Strike, Last to Fall node, which essentially the only reason I have this is for like a cheat death adrenaline proc occasionally. It's been kind of nice for the Awakener fight, but I think that's the only time that's even went off on this character. You go below 25%, it heals you, it gets rid of all the ailments, which is pretty good. But honestly, if you don't feel like you want it, or it doesn't proc enough for you to justify having it, you could just get Worthy Foe, which gives you another enemies take 20% increased damage. It's pretty good DPS boost. But I like the safety. It's been fine for me, even though it barely ever goes off. And then as far as the rest of the tree goes, it's pretty straightforward. We're getting life as much as we can, traveling for life, getting whatever bleed specific nodes we can find, and just making our way over towards all the HP nodes, getting resolute techniques so we can't get evaded, and life. Did I mention life? I think I mentioned life. Something about life. Full steel, really good. There'll be a link to the passive tree and everything else in the video description if you want to look it over yourself. One thing to note is that I do have a couple of melee related clusters that you would think don't make sense because these ones aren't being affected by our Lionized Fall. But for whatever reason, a lot of these two-handed melee nodes, if I look at this one, increased physical damage with two-handed melee weapons, but then increased damage with ailments from attack skills while wielding a two-handed weapon. You'll notice the ailment increase doesn't mention melee, it just mentions two-handed weapon. And bows are a two-handed weapon, they're just not a melee weapon. So, for whatever reason, these work. A little bit of damage here and there. Same with this destroyer cluster. They just happen to work for whatever reason. It's nice. Take advantage of it. And then we've got the jewels, pretty straightforward. Life and whatever damage multipliers you can get. There's a physical damage over time multiplier. Somewhere I believe I have on one of these. That's pretty nice. Yeah, physical damage over time multiplier. Life, dot damage, global physical damage. You get the idea. The only other thing with jewels is if you're doing something that you feel like you need it for, or you just want it in general. I use it for the Awakener fight. Corrupting Blood immunity is really nice for the new Awakener boss fight in particular. So I have this, I'll swap it in when I'm doing that boss. And I'll also swap in Withering Step, I've started doing in place of my Blood Rage because I don't use Blood Rage on the fight. So if I pop this in, and then when he does that maze attack where you need to sneak your way out before the meteor crushes you, just hit Withering Step, nice little speed boost. That way I don't need to use like a Quicksilver charge. It's a little convenient thing to do. But then the other thing for the passive tree, one thing you could do for jewels is if you got a Lethal Pride jewel, you could socket it here. And it should reach, I believe, at least 5 of these notes. Golem's Blood, Dirty Techniques, Destroyer. I believe it reaches Master of the Arena and Bravery, but not Art of the Gladiator. But you would have 5 notables being affected by the Lethal Pride. And then all the small notes giving you some strength for extra HP. But you could fish for things like Fortify Effect, percent life, global physical damage, maybe life regen on these notables. So the potential is there for that jewel. I haven't found one yet. I haven't bothered to buy one, but it is an option, something to consider. And I believe finally the Pantheons for the build. I've been running almost exclusively Soul of Solaris with Soul of Shikari. This one's for the poison immunity, a little bit of chaos mitigation. There's a lot of chaos damage this league. Solaris just elemental mitigation, single target mitigation. I'll occasionally swap to Ralakesh for the physical damage over time mitigation for something like Lab, or I think I've been using it on the Awakener fight since there is a little bit of physical damage over time, but mostly these two. Poison immunity is really nice, and I don't feel the need for any of the other major ones. And then the bandits, which I don't really have a way to show them, but killed all the bandits, got the extra passive point. Don't need any of the bandit benefits. I think that's everything. I think that's the build. That's the character. As far as leveling goes, sorry, I don't have any tips on leveling. I leveled this character as something else, not planning to turn it into a bleed build, and what I leveled it with was really bad and not worth mentioning. But I've heard you can level with bleed and it works pretty well. Just haven't seen it myself, so sorry, no leveling tips. But that's the setup. Hopefully I covered all the basics. Hopefully I got everything done. This is the first one of these videos I've done in a while, so it's probably a bit sloppy. But build is strong. If you're looking for a very safe, very efficient boss killer that can also map, granted not map particularly fast, and doesn't really break the bank to get started, since there's no real big uniques required other than the Lionized Fall Jewel and then a couple fossils to craft a bow. It's pretty good entry, and you can do it on Solo Self-Found. I actually started it on Solo Self-Found. The only thing for that is you either need this jewel or you need to be prepared to spend a lot of time farming Act 6 Mudflats to turn in sets of the Lion card. But if you want to do it, go for it. And that's all I got for this video. Thank you all for watching. Hope it was helpful. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you liked the build. And I'll see you in the next video, whenever that may be. Later.